Welcome back to Actually Useful, the show where we diagnose what's wrong with the internet and we chat with some of the good folks trying to fix it. How are we doing today, Ariel?
Well, the horrors persist, but so do we.
Indeed. I think you have quite a news item for us today, so I think I should just let you cook.
Well, for context, we're recording this on February 27th. So all the Anthropic Pentagon stuff went down in the last 48 hours. I kind of feel like it's going to be in a really different state by the time this episode comes out. But I do want to recap it because I feel like it is sort of the breaking headline of tech and enshittification this week. So for context, for the last few years, Anthropic has been positioned as the ethical AI option, in large part because they had a policy that said that they would pause training models if they ever felt like safety was compromised. Essentially, acknowledging that AI companies are working with a very novel technology that has massive societal implications. And so racing each other for profit above all else is a very dangerous race to the bottom. Other than that, Anthropic is not meaningfully different from any other Silicon Valley AI company. They're founded on money from FTX and Amazon. Their biggest partners are Google, NVIDIA, Microsoft, and Palantir. They do the same shady shit that their competitors do. They just settled a $1.5 billion lawsuit because they paid vendors to manually scan millions of physical books to feed Claude's training data, which they did by literally destroying the books, ripping out all the pages and pulling off the spine. And a bunch of those were library books. So don't be thinking that Anthropic has some kind of conscience. The only conscience that they have is the one that their deluded CEO keeps insisting exists inside of Claude, which he thinks is sentient. So since July 2025, Anthropic has already had a $200 million contract with the Department of Defense. So they were already working with our fascist authoritarian regime. And then in January, the Pentagon used Claude in their invasion of Venezuela, which violates one of the two big rules Anthropic had for them using their technology, which is that it should never be used to power fully autonomous weapons, and it should never be used for mass surveillance of Americans. In other words, the barest fucking minimum. The Pentagon's stance on this is that they should be able to use Claude for whatever they want because it's theirs and they paid for it, and woke is dead and they're very big, strong men. And when people tell them that they can't do the stuff they want to do, that's not fair because they're in charge. So Hegseth was like, Anthropic, if you don't let us use your fancy autocomplete to play with weapons of mass destruction and to dox and stalk everybody who's black and everybody who's brown and everybody who says mean things about us, then we're not going to give you any more money, and we're going to put you on the official list of supply chain risk.
Quick note for y'all, since recording this, the Department of Defense did actually designate Anthropic as a supply chain risk. So that means that anyone who does business with the U.S. military can't do any business with Anthropic. And obviously, that's a huge problem for them. So I guess we'll see what happens.
Anthropic did not agree, and they lost that contract for now. They did quietly abandon their supposedly foundational ethical premise about pausing development if safety was at risk, basically saying, hey guys, turns out everyone else is racing to the bottom, so if we stay out of the race, we won't win, and that would be really bad for us. And my biggest takeaway from this whole thing is that I'm really disappointed by the social media discourse around this, especially coming off of feeling so good about how quickly people clocked the real intention behind Ring's search party feature. A lot of people are commenting that they're so proud of Anthropic for declining the Pentagon contract, and as a result, they're switching from ChatGPT or Gemini over to Claude. They're calling Anthropic the Costco of AI, and they're saying, finally, a CEO with a backbone. I need people to hear me when I say this. You do not need a favorite AI company. You do not need a favorite billionaire. You have no horse in this race because these people don't care if you fucking starve. The only thing that's remarkable in this story is how low this bar is and how easy it is to feed American consumers absolute scraps when it comes to ethical integrity. So I guess I'm feeling sort of differently about the whole thing than maybe most of the internet is.
I saw a tweet that was like, Elon Musk wants to build a car factory on the moon. And then it was someone being like, tech reporters are like magician reporters if they actually believed in magic. just like credulously reporting on the woman they saw cut in half yesterday.
Yeah.
And it's like, we're not going to have like nice daddy capitalism like save us from any of this. It's kind of the point Cory Doctorow makes in enshittification, where he's talking about Apple has long had this brand of like, no. We charge you up front so then we don't have to do all the bullshit of like stealing your data and spying on you to make money off you on the back end. And it's very transactional and we're transparent. It's like, no. They do that shit too. It's just they also charge you an arm and a leg up front.
Yeah, I mean, this is a system that is incentivized to work this way. And like, I think that people are forgetting in this one moment that Anthropic has been involved. Like, there wasn't even a period where they were like, hey, you violated our contract. Like, Hegseth started this conversation, right? Like, they were already doing this. So there's no moral stance that's being taken here. And quite frankly, especially after seeing like what we've seen the men's Olympic hockey team go through, of like, this was a pretty good marketing decision, honestly. Like, the fact that so many people are saying like, oh, I'm switching over to Claude now because they have moral integrity. They don't have moral integrity. None of these fuckers have moral integrity. Like, don't use AI, guys. I don't understand.
So speaking of dude bros like Hegseth ruining our country, today's episode is a spicy one. We're going to be talking about the really pandemic of online sports betting that's grown in this country. And we're going to kind of be going through the evolution of how we got to the place we are. But just like to ground this conversation, I feel like we're back in the era of just like cigarette ads everywhere. Like, I by no means am like sports gambling should be illegal or any type of gambling should be illegal. Like, but we don't advertise cigarettes to kids. And so I just feel like there has to be a more sensible way of approaching these things.
Yeah, and I think alcohol is an interesting like regulatory comparison, because even though we know alcohol is really bad, I think personally there's a lot more we could be doing around how alcohol affects public health and affects kids. Like, I get that it's not bulletproof, but when you think about like a bar and like a liquor license, like liquor licenses are pretty well regulated. Like, you need to cut off people when they've been overserved. You can't let somebody drive home drunk. You can't sell it to somebody underage. Like, we all have stories of getting around it, but in general, like, bartenders take liquor licenses really fucking seriously. And so like, there are comparisons here that are like reasonable amounts of regulation, like common sense regulation around how we market gambling, what types of features are allowed in gambling. But I guess just even to kick this off even further back. So I'm not in the demographic for this. I'm not a sports person. This was very interesting to me. I grew up in North Carolina, which had one of the strictest anti-gambling laws my entire childhood. Like, I just didn't know. I wasn't like surrounded with like people's uncles or grandparents who were like doing scratch offs or whatever. So I really didn't know anything about how gambling worked. And I'm not a sports person. I feel like we've brought this up before. Absolutely no hate to sports people. It's just not for me. So when you hear me sound like an idiot, Josh is here to correct me. Josh brought it up because you're in the target demographic where you're getting all these ads. And I never get any of them. And so we watched, as sort of our source of truth here to kick us off, we watched this Vice Sports documentary on sports betting. And so I think just kicking it off with like how we even got here, because there is a real difference when it became legal in 2018.
Yeah, I mean, for those of you who maybe aren't in this space, like, I am really into basketball, really into baseball. I'm from LA, so I'm a Dodgers fan and a rare native Angelino Clippers fan. And I have just watched like the floodgates open, where you now have advertisements on YouTube for sports betting, advertisements on podcasts. The newest innovation is like having the athletes themselves in these ads for sports gambling. And like, there's been some scandals, which we're going to talk about, with like athletes betting on games, but you literally have the commissioner of basketball being one of the early voices pushing for this. You have the total marriage of analysis and like talking heads also promoting sports gambling websites. Like, what did you think was going to happen here? Of course there's going to be problems. And the thing that makes me the most scared is how much this is being rammed down the throat of young men and just like draining the money very early out of a lot of people's bank accounts.
Okay, yeah. So basically in 1992, so sports betting used to be legal, more widespread. Growing up, part of the reason we did not necessarily see a lot of sports betting unless you lived in Nevada is that in 1992, PAPSA went into effect, the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act. And it was really backed by a lot of the major sports leagues and the big franchises. They felt like sports betting was going to fundamentally degrade the relationship that fans had. They thought that it was going to pose integrity issues to the athletes themselves. And that's because there are major fixing scandals. The 1919 World Series, the Chicago White Sox lost like through the game on purpose because they were getting paid off by a gambling syndicate. Pete Rose. Actually, both of these stories are about the Cincinnati Reds, a team I had never thought of until this research. But Pete Rose, who also played for the Cincinnati Reds, admitted to betting on his own team when he was both a player and a manager. So like there are stories that are very publicized of the existence of sports betting degrading the integrity of sports and really changing the relationships. So between 1992 and 2018, sports betting was not super widely popular. And so here, I want to explain sort of what it looked like. So in Nevada, there was already a ton of sports betting. Everybody got sort of grandfathered in. So sports betting was still legal in the state of Nevada in all of its forms, but it was largely like in person at casino sports books. In later years, like 2014 onwards, Nevada actually geo-fenced mobile betting. So once they like moved into, you can have a Win app or an MGM app and you can do things inside of it. It was still geo-fenced into Nevada. And then there was like casino gambling in different tribal reservations. There was riverboat casinos. I think Atlantic City had some sports betting, but it was very much like wherever it existed in 1992 is where it stayed for the most part until 2018. Now, I was thinking about this because I remember betting at the Santa Anita horse track in 2013 and I won a bunch of money. It was very exciting, my like big foray into gambling. And I was wondering, like, why was that legal? And that's because horse racing is considered pari-mutuel betting, which we're going to circle back to at the end of this conversation. So pari-mutuel betting is considered legally a different type of gambling because you're not technically betting against the house. So when I placed a bet at the Santa Anita racetrack, I won the pot of the losers. I did not win against the house. And so we'll talk about that because that affects how peer-to-peer betting is now regulated, but that is a different type of betting. And then there was international online betting, but it was still technically illegal, but you could get it.
So the earliest form of these kind of like online sports betting sites that we see now, DraftKings launches in 2012. And so the way they got around the anti-gambling laws was that it was based on fantasy games where you draft a team of players, and they argued that this was skill-based. So this isn't gambling. This is using, knowledge of the sport, putting money down, and then, having a result be determined by the real life play. So it kind of exists in this gray area. But then in 2018, 6 years later, the Supreme Court strikes down PABSA.
Yeah, Chris Christie really pushed for it. Basically between 2012, like pretty much as soon as DraftKings came on the scene, casinos were taking note of like, this is getting really popular. And so New Jersey was one of the first states, but there were other states. Basically all the way from 2012 to 2018 were states pushing to try to overrule PABSA. So there were like individual state laws that would try to threaten it. And it just became noisy enough that it finally got up to the Supreme Court and they struck down PABSA, thereby legalizing state-sanctioned sports betting.
And in between these years, the commissioner of basketball, Adam Silver, wrote an op-ed in the New York Times where he basically said, let's bring this into the light, let's legalize and regulate sports gambling, and it'll be a lot healthier if it's just out in the open. We can impose boundaries on it, we can make it safer. What was his motivation for doing this? Well, there's been a massive windfall for the entire media ecosystem around sports, so we'll get to that in a bit. But first, we want to talk about, like, why is this a good market in the first place? So sports gamblers watch twice as many games as even really passionate fans. Sports gambling also kind of mirrors some of the experience of being a fan. I don't gamble on sports, but I'm certainly like a religious Clippers fan. And, every possession, every play, you're kind of riding the ups and downs of the game. You get massive dopamine hits when you win. It's crushing when you lose. And so the gambling kind of cycle itself that's based on, unpredictable reward cycles and all these things kind of recreates that feeling. So you're tapping into a customer base that already likes this sort of experience. Then, even though now they don't claim that their services are like skill based, a lot of the marketing is still based around like, oh, capitalize on your ball knowledge. Like if you have a good feeling that this team is like on a hot streak, or you know exactly what's going to happen, like you can make a bunch of money. American sports in particular have frequent breaks in play instead of soccer where you have, just one break in the middle. They'll have frequent breaks whenever there's a timeout. People are checking their phones, and so it's right there for you to go online. Sports gamblers themselves make riskier decisions than any other type of gambler, which I actually didn't know that. That was something I thought was interesting in this documentary. And then just to that last point, younger people have less developed brains. People, in college are getting drunk, going to parties, making micro bets here and there. If we're looking at it as like a Machiavellian, like just exactly what type of customer base do you want to exploit, it's a pretty decent option.
Yeah. And now there are so many tech capabilities that were not possible in 2012 when DraftKings launched that are now possible just because of how far we've come in being able to build these sophisticated models that have a lot more computing power. So some examples, like these are essentially gameplay, like gambling innovations, right? So these tech algorithms can model so much faster. Now you can do these really complicated parlays. Parlays are combinations of different plays and is the most successful of the features on these apps is that people really engage with parlays. It's really exciting. Even the UX itself, as I was seeing it like in this documentary, there's something really simple about being able to see like each of your different combinations in the parlay turn green as the game goes on. It feels like you're having this integrated experience between your bet and the game. Other examples are live betting. So like live betting was not really a thing that could exist when you're doing it manually. And now that you have all of these models that can take into account all the variables of what could happen next, live betting is basically betting on what is going to happen next in the game. Are they going to pitch a ball or a strike? And then similarly, Josh mentioned micro bets. So same idea, like you can bet on, one of the guys in this documentary is he's an expert in betting on tennis. And he talks about like, you can bet on a single point in tennis and see if the point is going to land or not. So like all of these things enable more options for bets with different levels of risk and reward. And also their engagement opportunities. So as Josh mentioned, you have this environment where you're surrounded by your friends. You're already pumped up on adrenaline. You have sort of this like spiritual connection to investing in this game. You feel a sense of like camaraderie with the players. You're drinking. So like let's say you went into this game starting by saying, I'm going to bet $15 at the beginning of the game. Great. Like back in the day, if you theoretically didn't think of a phone and you had somebody like place a bet on their laptop for the game, it's not going to be that many environments in which they then like take their laptop and continue betting through the game. But like on a phone, that's exactly what everybody's going to be doing. So you take your phone with you to the party. Now you're getting nudges from the app itself telling you what kinds of bets are being placed. It's giving you that FOMO sensation of everybody else is making a bunch of money. Your friends are going to be doing it. You're all going to be invested in this. You're drinking, your inhibitions are down. So like, as they're going through this experience, as they're describing this user experience in the documentary of like, okay, you put down $15 first, and then maybe you put down $10 on 10 more bets throughout the game as you got more hyped, as you got drunker. And they're talking about like all of the different tech capabilities that allow this to happen. And my product manager brain, at one point, I got really excited where I was like, ooh, very sticky. And I said that and like wrote it down in my notes. And then this guy who's like their anti-betting, who's like anti-gambling advocate or whatever, he's describing that DraftKings acquired Simplebet, an AI tool that enables it to do a lot of this micro betting stuff. And he's talking about how big micro betting was for changing the way people engage during a game. And he said, these apps are very addictive, very compulsive. Those are clumsy words. The words the guy from Simplebet used was sticky. So like, this is very much, as Josh and I were talking about this.
She's a PM, y'all.
I told Josh, I was like, this is honestly, it sucks. This is good PM work, right? Like this is making somebody engage more with your app. It's just that the stakes are so incredibly high here. And so like most people are losing tons of money on this. this.
Totally. So that's kind of the development side. Then on the marketing and branding side, they get all these ambassadors who are either like extremely incredible athletes themselves or like very attractive women to basically get in your TikTok feed or ads on TV while you're watching a game and tell you to bet on the game. And to be honest, dude, if I was like a lot younger and was growing up in that kind of environment that just, it seems very normalized and like all my friends are doing it, like I could very easily see that becoming a very slippery slope, you know? And to your point, I have an uncle who will put $50 on a game here and there, but that's such a different, like, there's so much friction to placing that bet that it's like you kind of have to find like a friend who wants to bet the other way or go to a casino, whatever. And there's a big psychological difference between I'm going to put $50 down and then go watch the game versus I don't want to do 50, but I'd do 10. And then you're like, oh, that didn't hit, but I'll just bet 15 and then I'll cover the loss. And then you're like, oh, well, that didn't hit. I'll just do like 25. And then, you know, very quickly you're spending 3-4 times as much as you would have if you were just placing a static bet at the beginning.
Yeah, and as for the marketing, they know exactly what they're doing because the integrated advertising is definitely a huge part of the problem. You're watching ESPN, you're watching the game, all the ads are for gambling. There's a ticker at the bottom that's telling you what people are betting on. But even still, the ads that are happening on primetime television very much position, you can tell that they're a little regulated because they position these apps as entertainment apps. It's all about like, one of the slogans is like become a thrillionaire, right? Where it's like, it's all about like tying your fortunes to the players and you're doing it for the spirit and it's a fun game, right? But to, as Josh said, then you open up your phone and all these paid influencers are like super hot young women who are basically standing in front of a whiteboard being like, this is how you should bet today, guys. And it's like a get rich quick scheme. The first time they like showed one of these in the video, the woman was like walking and I didn't know the context. It was like one of the very first shots of the documentary. And I just see this woman walking, talking about bets, and her tits were like artificially bouncing up and down to the point where I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be looking at here except her tits. And then you get to it and it's like, oh no, that is exactly what I'm supposed to be looking at. That's what this is. So like, yeah, it's really obvious what they're doing. And then as Josh said too, like they have these VIP programs that exist for big losers, right? So like if you're losing a ton of money, you're really valuable to them. So they want you to keep losing more money with them, and they will pay to fly you out to these huge concerts. They'll buy you super expensive meals. They'll like give you a personal host. They'll take you out to the games, but they only exist as long as you keep losing.
And the thing that's so insidious about this, dude, is just like sports gambling addicts have a higher rate of suicide than any other type of disorder, like any other type of mental disorder. And again, I don't believe in like abolishing sports gambling, but the fact that we're letting it just get this out in the open and in your face constantly is going to lead to some really tragic outcomes. And these VIP experiences, I think, are in place to kind of try to counteract that and make you overcome the depression or the, you know, anxiety or the judgment of yourself and be like, well, maybe I lost $200, but I got, you know, tickets to this really cool experience, or I got to go to this game or whatever, sit in the DraftKings box. So they know exactly what they're doing.
Yeah, they have to be able, I mean, we call that variable reward, right? Of like, you never know what you're going to get. And it's both in the app as to whether or not you're going to win a bet, but it's also in your real life. So like if you're having when you're down a lot of money and you're having a serious progression of feeling down, they have to put you back up to give you that variable reward to feel that unpredictability that stokes the dopamine loop.
But I also think that like this ties into a just broader trend of Gen Z having no financial hope for the future. And it's like, who among us is going to be able to buy a house or like have a nice wedding or like be able to afford kids? I think there's something there towards the spending habits of Gen Z being on like meme stocks, crypto, sports gambling, Labubus, like collectibles, you know, and then yet on top of that, school debt. You don't have a lot of incentive to like make smart financial decisions because it feels like you're kind of fucked either way. So it's like, well, at least this way there's a percentage chance that I'll be able to get out ahead, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's both that there's a percentage chance I could get out ahead, as like it's attractive to think of the idea of any get rich quick scheme as attractive. They've always been attractive. But I also think like this is just another tool of wealth extraction. And I mean, we talked about this, but like I saw somebody posit that we're probably going to see gambling debt forgiveness before we see student loan forgiveness, because the people who are suddenly in extravagant
You're so
gambling
right.
debts are largely young Gen Z men that came from middle to upper class families, had disposable income at one point in time, are largely white. Like, it's coming from people who are going to be in power in the way that we've organized our society. And so like they're going to want to fix their own debts. And yeah, and I do think it is ultimately, it's just more tools to isolate young men. And like we'll talk about this too, but like this is just even more making the phone a prison for young men.
I'm going to go one further, which is I think we're going to see these sports betting companies become lending outfits.
We already are.
Oh.
Because when we get to predictive markets, technically predictive markets are banks. They're not gambling apps. They're technically banks.
Sometimes I hate working on this podcast with you, dude.
Yeah,
I don't like that.
I know. Okay, before we get into predictive markets real quick, I do want to comment on, in this documentary, for better or worse, they did feature these guys called sharps, which I was interested in because, again, when I first started this documentary, having no context going in, part of me was like, oh, are Gen Z guys now really good at math? Because to me, part of the reason I'm not interested in gambling, other than like it isn't the particular dopamine scratch my brain likes, is like I know that the way to do it is sophisticated statistics that like my brain has no interest in doing. But some people's brains really like that. So they talk about, like, they feature some of these guys who are the rare professional bettor who can actually turn a profit from their bets. And typically these guys are both like hobby gamblers who do it for their own money, and also they work for like, they're either like a gambling advocate or they work for these different apps or whatever, or they're what they call an originator, which is a person who actually like dictates what the bets should be in the market. What's interesting is, from a tech perspective, both how the new technology allows for sharps to exist and also punishes sharps in ways that like a card counter wouldn't have gotten in a real casino. So you have like when somebody's counting cards in a casino, they get kicked out. So suddenly there's no way to get any more value out of that card counter because they were making the house lose. So the way that sharps play now is basically, there's a couple different ways to exploit the system. One guy talked about it as like a quantity, as a volume game. So essentially when there are like big niche use cases, so somebody gets injured in the middle of a game, it changes all of the models in a way that they're not able to quickly correct for. Like there's a certain amount of computing that has to happen when really unpredictable variables get introduced. Now, if it's a really big game, the model might catch it more quickly than you're able to place a bet on it. But when you look at situations where there are a lot of simultaneous games happening, so like college basketball, where he says sometimes there might be 30 or 40 games on at the same time, and you get a big injury, if you know what you're paying attention to and you're able to do this, one of these guys was able to sort of exploit where the systems are going to lag. And so he can see, if he looks at all these different markets, where the bets are not able to account for this new use case. So that's one way to exploit it. The other way was like the tennis guy we talked about, where he specializes in tennis because tennis has a constrained number of variables. There's only 2 players. There's only so many different ways that you can play tennis. There's only so many different types of points. And so for him, it's that he's able to do the pattern recognition of what's happening faster than all of the different markets can do it at a time. So that's how the tech capabilities sort of enable a different type of sharp than we've seen in in-person casinos. But they also have punishments that are different. So like the tennis guy, they throttle sharps. At the end of the day, even in pari-mutuel betting, you're still kind of betting against the house. There's no way that these apps are going to come away not wanting to make money off of all of these people. So typically these professional bettors, they'll put down 10,000, 15,000 on single bets. Well, once the apps figure out what you're doing, when it's a situation like DraftKings or FanDuel and you're betting against their own bookmakers, right? Like you're betting against the company, they're going to throttle the hell out of sharps. So like the tennis guy talked about how he got throttled to a max of 14 $15 to bet on tennis. But if he goes into basketball, he can bet $200 because the app already knows that he doesn't know shit about basketball, and they can probably still eke more money out of him that way. So that's what I mean by like these tech companies have so many variables that allow them to understand your personal habits of betting that they can figure out how to both stymie any opportunities you have to get a leg up on them while also still leaving channels open for them to make more money at your expense.
So then the latest innovation here, which is now slowly destroying my will to live, is the predictive markets. So this is like if you've heard of Polymarket or Kalshi. The way that these are technically different is that it's peer-to-peer betting instead of against the house.
Like pari-mutuel betting.
Right, totally. They literally have stated, and this is so dystopian, they want to financialize any difference of opinion. So you can bet on, we've talked about this on the show before, but you can bet on like the war lines in Ukraine and Russia. You could bet on how bad is the genocide in Gaza going to get? How many casualties are there going to be in South Sudan? Like really just grisly stuff, but then also totally innocuous stuff like how many assists is this player going to have in this game of basketball, or how many passing yards are there going to be in a game. And so the interesting thing here is they don't actually throttle winners because it's not their money that they're staking against the community, it's other consumers. So basically, if I want to put $50 on X interaction happening, then I find Ariel who's like, well, I think that interaction isn't going to happen. Then we're going head to head. And then, you know, the technology gets a lot more complex from there. But that's the basic idea. However, they, of course, want to attract customers. Now, Ariel, you can't have a nice functioning prediction market if you don't have customers. So what do? But they seed these bets, aka they artificially inflate the market with their own money and then have you bet against them. So is that not just betting against the house, Ariel?
I mean, the guy literally says, their head of trading, this is a direct quote from his interview in this documentary. He said, if we don't move the markets, consumers can come in and make a lot of expected value off of us. That sounds an awful lot like the house always wins. Like there's no functional difference here. And he says like they go in, I mean, you can watch them. There's a scene in this documentary where they're actively seeding bets. And it's not just like, he implied that it's a way of providing supply, which would be like, okay, there's not enough bets on war crimes and people love to bet on war crimes. So let's put in more predictions about war crimes. That's one thing if you're providing like the inventory of what can be bet on because you want it to move in a certain direction. It's still influencing your market in a way that is not hands-off, full peer-to-peer. But that's not just what they do. They then bet against their own customers. Like you see them in this documentary of like raising the ceiling. Like they're trying to raise the bet. And it's just like, these people are betting against you. Like these companies they still have a bankroll that they're keeping score on. And so like they're still going to win. And so we foreshadowed this, but technically predictive markets are not considered legally gambling. They are regulated in the same way that cryptocurrency is regulated as a financial product. So they are technically considered a designated contract market, and they are regulated by the CFTC, which means you can use it at 18 instead of 21 because it's not gambling. So you can go even younger. And like we already know from a bunch of people interviewed in this that like these kids are getting on there even earlier. I mean, there were a couple different recovering gambling addicts who were like, I started gambling at 15. They talked about how there was a period of time, you know, in 2018 when the industry was in transition, there was sort of an assumption that what was going to happen is that DraftKings came in and sort of said, hey, there's a huge market here for people to want to do sports betting. And the assumption was that the legacy casinos that already had a lot of technical innovations were going to like end up dominating in that market. So like the MGMs and the Wynns, the Caesars, right? And that's not really what happened. I mean, they did expand into sports betting, but it didn't fundamentally change their portfolio. What's actually happening is the other direction, which is that DraftKings now has online casinos. So like that's the real play is, as we mentioned, currently in this podcast with two people, 50% of the market of this podcast is not interested in sports betting at all. But I do like to play stupid little games on my phone. So like that's really where they're trying to expand into. And I absolutely think that we're seeing with these predictive markets, the idea of financializing everything, the idea of already being regulated as a financial product. I absolutely think that they're going to end up becoming lenders.
This is the stuff that would get the robber barons of the 19th century foaming at the mouth. Like this is a level of wealth extraction that they couldn't even imagine. You know, like we're just heading to the point where our country is nothing. I'm sorry. I'm getting too political.
No. I think you should say, and I want to add something to that. I think that you're right, and I want to add something to that, which is that when you think about like think in your head, right? This is a product podcast. Think in your head about all of the different products of any kind that you've seen advertised or used by a friend in the last week. And then ask yourself, like, how innovative does that product seem, right? When you have capitalism go for so long that in only the direction of wealth extraction, because our relationship to one another is primarily capital, there are only so many ways to extract capital. The buying and selling of debt is the oldest game in the book. This is not a new idea. And until or unless we offer different incentives in our tech markets, in our regulation of the economy, we're going to get more of this just flat. Like they're not even pretending like it's a fun game. They're just saying, here's a wealth extraction tool. Do you think you're powerful enough to be the winner? Like that's it. That's all that this is. They are openly saying, we're now putting wealth extraction in everybody's hands, and we're all dumb enough to be like, well, maybe I could be the robber baron this time, right? Like nobody's winning in this except these companies. That's it.
I think the best term for this that they used was a casino in your pocket.
Yeah.
And that we're now, this is just building off of years of getting us addicted to our phones. They're like, well, they're already addicted to this. Let's get them addicted. Let's see what else we can get them addicted to, But luckily, just to end on a hopeful note, the Trump administration does seem really focused on this. I think we're getting some good regulation coming down the pipeline. So Ariel, can you paint a picture for like the bright and shiny future?
Yeah, well, it's going to be bleak for quite a while. So basically the argument that the lobbyists are making against regulation, like they're saying this is regulation, right? Like that's the argument for any kind of regulation. We saw this with cannabis. We see it with any kind of drugs, right? Or prostitution, sex work, like anytime you want to legalize something, the assumption is, well, it's already happening. And if we can legalize it, we can regulate it and we can dictate in what terms it happens and how are people staying safe in it. So that's their argument. So the gambling lobbyists say that sports betting has always been going on. And from 1992 to 2018, that there was still so much sports betting happening. And now that we have this level of data where we're able to track all of these bets in, openly in the databases, whatever, that now we're able to like spot insider trading and fraudulent betting more easily. And there's already been huge headlines about professional athletes fixing outcomes, insider trading. A lot of times it's happening because these athletes are in huge gambling debts. The athletes are also young men most of the time. Like these are young men that are even more pushed into living a certain status. They're even more personally invested in the outcomes of these games. Professional athletes are hyper competitive to a clinically relevant degree, right? So like you have a situation where their whole environment is surrounded by gambling. So like a lot of times they're doing these agreements to fix an outcome or change gameplay in a certain way because they have a back end deal to get money, and they're oftentimes using it to pay off a gambling debt. Also, like this happens with predictive markets as well. Literally like 2 days ago, an editor for Mr. Beast was banned from Kalshi because the bet was for how a new Mr. Beast video is going to end. And basically he, rookie mistake, bet correctly on a whole bunch of them. And they were like, well, you've never bet before and now you're getting 100%. So it seems like you might know something. And now he's like banned from Kalshi.
Although there's more like consequences for like a Mr. Beast editor than clear people who work in the Pentagon betting on like Venezuela and Ukraine. Like what are we dealing with here where like yes, that's a shitty thing to do, that you're just taking advantage of other people. And I agree that guy should have gotten banned. That makes total sense to me. But how is this private citizen facing more consequences? I just can't deal with it, Ariel.
I think you know the answer to that, Josh. I think we all know the answer to that.
We live in a good and fair country.
Super good and super fair. And we live in a country that technically is supposed to regulate banks and financial products with this set of laws called KYC laws, know your customer laws. So like if you have a credit card, you know how sometimes your credit card will email you like once a year and say, hey, how much money are you making right now? They're doing that. They'll usually say it as like, tell us how much money you're making so we can extend your credit line, which they will if the amount of money you're making has gone up. But the reason they do that is that they are under regulated obligation to know how much money their customers make, because there is a relationship between how much money you're making and how much credit they can responsibly offer you, right? So because these predictive markets, these, you know, are financial products, they're supposed to be some level of know your customer. That's not like a new thing, but they openly on this doc multiple times say like there's so many situations where they're violating KYC laws. Like one of the guys said he got invited to be in a VIP program when he was 22 and down like $15,000. And he's like, they never asked me if I even had a job. Like they were not interested in knowing what my financial futures were. When I went to the Santa Anita racetrack in 2013 and won a bunch of money, I had to go to the ATM at the racetrack to get cash to place a bet. You still cannot pay for weed with a credit card. Like we're actually pretty good at regulating anything that's in a gray area can't be paid for with a credit card. Anything that's supposed to be like placing bets, like you can't put your Vegas bets on a credit card. You have to put it on cash or a debit card. Well, you can use credit cards on these apps. So like you can basically max out your credit card and lose a bunch of money from your credit card and be in debt twice with interest, which is crazy. I will say actually starting March 2nd, FanDuel is no longer accepting credit cards, which I guess is something. And I will say just a last note on regulation, you know, one of the guys in the doc posited that where we're at from a regulatory standpoint is so bleak that his predictions for what would have to change in order to regulate it are one of three things that's going to have to happen. Either there's going to be a notable rise in addiction and suicide rates, which there basically already is. Like we already know, like in the UK where sports betting has been legal a lot longer, this is already a very well documented problem. And if you watch this documentary, like it's there, the data is there around rising addiction and suicide rates as a result of gambling. Another thing that can happen, they talk about like these athletes are getting aggressively harassed. Gabby Thomas got harassed by a fan at the start of a race. Jimmy Butler was like harassed really aggressively by a fan in a car. Like seemed like you might want to like run him over. It was very scary. So like one of the other posits is that an athlete will get killed by a gambler who lost a bunch of money, and that might prompt regulation. And then the third possible thing that would happen is like a major championship game is fixed because of gambling. So like basically something really terrible is going to have to happen for them to give a shit. And I feel like the rise in addiction and suicide, because it's not affecting celebrities or super well-known people, like I don't even know if that's a valid prompting event, considering that it's already happening and they don't seem to care.
Problem gamblers are 4 times more likely to die by suicide before the age of 24, and 1 in 5 gambling addicts contemplate suicide. And then the thing that's even worse there is that if you call 1-800-GAMBLER, which is like the hotline that on all these ads, they'll be like, if you have a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. It's kind of like how at the end of like a commercial telling you that beer is the best thing ever invented, they'll be like, please drink responsibly. It's, you know, it's a cover your ass move. But if you do call this, they'll try to help you and they'll try to explain, you know, your options. But they're all funded by the gambling companies. So if you ask them point blank, is gambling bad? They can't say yes. They have to say, well, we believe that gambling is neither inherently good nor bad, and give you this bullshit. So the regulation's going to have to clearly come from outside the industry.
And I think like all addiction, I mean, there's such a shame component in it, especially because it's something that is like being marketed as really fun and wholesome and like community, sports, togetherness, go to the party, make a little extra money. So then it makes it like extra hard for somebody somebody who does think that they have a problem to actually get to the point where they're willing to accept help. And so like in this documentary, they follow these 3 guys who are like young dudes, and we follow them throughout like their day of watching sports and betting on sports. And they start so optimistically. They're having so much fun. They like give some stats on how often they do this. And it's like, it seems like it's a treasured ritual for them to like get together. And as the day goes on and they see the games, also as a person who isn't super interested in sports, I do feel like it's uncomfortable to watch people having a bad time watching their sports game. But like these people were having a bad time watching their team and also losing a ton of money. And you can just see them as they're like drinking more, like their day is just going downhill. And you have to wonder, how many days are you actually having a bad time and not a fun time? And at one point, one of these guys is like, he just says casually, "I really need to stop gambling, man." And the producer says, "You say that, but like, is that serious? Are you saying that offhandedly, or do you mean that?" And he goes, "Oh no, I actually mean that. I think my life would be better if I stopped gambling. Actually, gambling addiction runs in my family. I've been told my whole life to stay away from it. I have a tattoo of dice on my arm because my grandfather was so addicted to gambling." And it's just like, what are we doing here? Like, we got to find a better way. Like, this is so bad that we're just letting people get into these situations. And then it's so hard. I mean, we're not even close to the point of being able to understand gambling. It literally just got added to the most recent DSM. I think we've come really far in how we talk about drug addiction and people who are experiencing drug addiction. That took so long to get to that point, you know? So it's definitely seeming bleak. And if you're listening to this, like, we want you to be aware of these tech companies. I mean, hopefully you know this, but they do not have your best interests at heart. They are always going to make more money. And we'll try to find some better resources than 1-800-GAMBLER that we can put in the episode description. Because, I mean, even that guy with the dice tattoo, he talked about like one time at the ATM was like a sticker for 1-800-GAMBLER, and he had just lost a ton of money. So he was like, "Well, let me call them." And he was like, it really wasn't very helpful. Like, they basically were like their response was, "Oh, you lost $5,000. People regularly call us after having lost like $40,000. And he was like, "Okay, and like, what am I supposed to do with that information?"
Well, before we get to Falcon Mode, I do just want to say that Actually Useful is brought to you by Polymarket. So today, if you use our...
It's the second time we've done that bit too. It's just so funny because Polymarket is so bad.
mean, dude, they were literally... This is so stupid. But on the TNT basketball desk, they were like talking about this coach of the Trailblazers who got like arrested for sports gambling. And then like at the bottom of the screen is a banner for DraftKings, and they have to read copy for an ad for DraftKings as they're talking about. And it's just like, dude, what are we doing here?
I mean, in this doc, half of the YouTube ads, I watched it on YouTube, which obviously I don't pay for YouTube. So I got like 50 fucking ads. And like literally half of them were gambling ads. Like they were like, "Oh, you like gambling? Here, let's give you these gambling ads."
Yeah, dude. Well, Ariel, should we go Falcon Mode?
Let's go Falcon Mode.
Okay, so Falcon Mode is our listener submitted segment where we usually take a listener submitted idea or a problem and we chat about how to make it more useful, feasible, or fundable. But what do we got today?
So this is an interesting one. This is like a Falcon Mode from the wild, actually. So you guys know we love 404 Media. They report on a whole bunch of shit that's interesting to us, and they are super independently funded and very nice people. Well, last October, they put out an article about how people are using Meta smart glasses, the like Meta Ray-Ban glasses, to film people without their consent, which I think a lot of us know that that's happening, but it just seems sort of like a spooky, vague thing. There's supposed to be a recording light in these glasses that like would let somebody know that you're being recorded, or that the glasses are not just like innocuous glasses, but they're very easy to disable. It's very easy and cheap to disable them. So 404 Media put out that article in October. Well, recently, a sociologist and hobbyist developer named Eve Jean Renaud, I think, made an app called Nearby Glasses that detects when smart glasses are nearby. He was inspired by the article and thought, "Hey, I think I know how to solve this problem." And so he's created a solution for it. So basically, the app works by looking for these Bluetooth signals called advertising frames. They're small bits of data that devices broadcast as part of their normal operation. So he used a directory of Bluetooth low energy manufacturers. And then basically there's only so many types of smart glasses on the market right now. So he put them in to be compatible to look for signals by Meta, by Luxottica, who owns Ray-Ban and most other luxury sunglasses. Fun fact, I used to work for them. And then Snap as well has a pair of glasses that it looks for. So those are like the three main providers of glasses. And this app just runs passively. You can look at it and see if there's smart glasses nearby. So if you're in a place that is sketchy, or like the Venice Boardwalk, I know people are constantly recording folks out there. I don't know why that's like the hotbed for it, but that's a good way that you can find out if somebody is potentially recording you without your consent. I'll tell you the one time you should be using smart glasses: animal rescue videos. If you are unbeaching a whale, if you are releasing a rescued bird, I understand you need both hands, and I would like to see the footage, so please wear the glasses. But that's the only acceptable use case, in my opinion.
Honestly, I would love to see a bunch of cute animals getting rescued from the POV of the rescuer. But again, don't use them to be creepy, y'all.
Don't use them to be creepy.
Well, thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in. You can always email us at heyactuallyuseful@gmail.com. We're on social media as Actually Useful Pod. And send us ideas for Falcon Modes. Just say hi. Let us know what you think of the show. And we hope everyone has a good couple weeks.
Bye. Actually Useful is part of the Industry Plant Podcast Network. It's co-hosted and created by Ariel Butters and co-hosted, produced, and edited by Josh Stretton Carlson. If you like the show, please consider subscribing to our Substack or YouTube, or give us a follow on most social media platforms at Actually Useful Pod.